Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, it's a pleasure to be here. And before I start, let me just thank Professor Devonish for inviting me to a conference of this nature. He tells people that I'm a linguist, and I say I'm not in the real purest sense of the term. I just love the study of language and languages. I suppose that makes me a linguist, but sometimes, as I normally say, I'm usually quite odd when I have to talk to linguists, whose profession, whose specialism it is. I remember being interviewed not too long ago by a doctoral student from K-ville. She was talking about, she's doing something on linguistics in the Caribbean. And her first question to me was, what do I think of the theories of, and she gave me a few names, and I, sort of scratched my head, because really I had never heard of these linguists. So I said to myself, she must be wondering what kind of a linguist I am. But so I had to say to her again, I'm not really a linguist. I just love Creole, and I've been involved in promotion of Creole languages. And languages was the subjects of my first degree, so in that sense. We are here to look at taking final decisions on a charter on language policy and language rights. And I thought that if there was need to justify spending time and resources on a conference on language policy and language rights in the Creole-speaking Caribbean, one perhaps could find reason enough in some of Nobel laureate Derek Walcott's thoughts on the significance of the region's national and indigenous languages, as he articulated in one of his poems. In the poem, What the Twilight Says, he writes, and I quote him there, "What would deliver the Caribbean person from servitude was the forging of a language that went beyond mimicry, a dialect which had the force of revelation as it invented names for things, one which finally settled on its own mode of inflection," unquote. In fact, language as salvation is a recurring theme in many of Derek Walcott's works, which is perhaps what led St Lucian June Bob, who is a Walcott scholar, to speak of nation languages and indigenous languages of the region as a vehicle of preservation as well as deliverance. Yet, in spite of their potential for liberalizing their users, the development of language policy and the practice of these nation languages, these creoles, have not been a preoccupation of the region's administrators. It certainly has not been a preoccupation of policymakers in Creole-speaking St. Lucia. And although the topic asks for Creole-speaking, the development of policy in the Caribbean, I'm going to confine myself to what I know best and just talk about Creole in St. Lucia. Perhaps a bit of history will help place into context the St. Lucian experience. As most people know, the vicissitudes of war between Britain and France saw St. Lucia change hands 14 times during a 200-year period before it was finally ceded to Britain by the Treaty of Paris in 1814, but under the express condition that French civil laws should continue to be the law of the land. And so this explains why the island had long been regarded as a British colony in, and I quote, little more than name, where the people were French in, and I quote from Bacchus, language, manners, and feelings. Thus it was that it was a French-based Creole that survived, one which the majority of people spoke or heard on a daily basis, but which was never considered desirable within the educational policy models was selected by the colonial and the post-independence administrators. The formulation of a language policy for St. Lucia, which would formalize the status of Creole, therefore remains as elusive as ever. Professor Lawrence Carrington, and there again, you know, when you are quoting people, it's all right when they're not there. You can always say what you want. But, and you can always put something in. But he's there. So Professor Lawrence Carrington, one of the foremost experts on St. Lucian Creole, and we'll talk about that later, writing in the 1980s, outlined the consequences of adhering to a policy of monolingualism in the bilingual St. Lucian community. He saw it leading to, and I quote him, the creation of a linguistically insecure, inarticulate person who retreats the moment he feels that a particular issue requires a variety of language in which he is deficient. For he has been led to see his own language as having a place in his life that cannot be for the expression of real thought, and hence cannot be used for serious expression. End of quote. But I would say, indeed, many today, 30 years on, would still want to confine the use of St. Lucian Creole to the lighter side of life, to jokes and songs and entertainment. What I will do is to look, first of all, at the development of language policy, and then I'll look at the development of the practice in St. Lucia. In 1980, there was a national consultation on education that was convened by the Ministry of Education. And I think, again, it was facilitated by Professor Lawrence Carrington. That's why I say he was one of the foremost experts. And that consultation called for the formulation of a policy that would incorporate the use of Creole in the formal education system. But the lack of resources was cited then as the reason for government's inability to implement these recommendations. Calls for the establishment of a national commission that would address the issue of a language policy for St. Lucia have since been made time and time again by linguists and cultural activists, but these initiatives have not taken root. One might argue that the political will that would have sustained such initiatives have not been sufficiently tested by popular demand. I always say that for St. Lucians there is an ambiguity and an ambivalence about the language. And they love it, it's theirs. But as I say, if it comes to, you know, giving it serious consideration, bringing it into formal discourse, you know, there's a resistance. They hold back. And so the policymakers, therefore, to my mind, have not been sufficiently challenged to take, you know, really serious steps to develop a language policy for St. Lucia that would give Creole the place that it does deserve. In 1999 or thereabouts, there was a symposium on the Creole language that was convened to assess progress in the initiatives that had been implemented since 1980. In 2000, we had a national cultural policy drawn up that was approved by the Ministry of Social Transformation and Culture, and that spoke to the role and place of the Creole language in the following terms. And it said, the government and people of St. Lucia, given the critical role of language in shaping cultural identity, recognize officially and support concretely the promotion of the St. Lucian Creole language and recognize the value of and encourage research into and preservation of the St. Lucian Creole language. That was in 2000. But this national policy for culture was to pave the way for placing culture as a pivot for development. In fact, nowadays, culture is regarded as the fourth pillar for sustainable development. And that policy was based on a model CARICOM regional cultural policy, which was seen as another building block for regional integration. And to help implement that cultural policy, a cultural development foundation was established. But this national policy on language development, and more particularly the promotion of St. Lucian culture, has still not yet found a place on the Foundation's agenda or program plan. And perhaps the most recent attempt to stir the region to action in the development of policies for the Creole languages of the region is the recommendation by the Caribbean Education for All Plan of Action 2000 to 2015 that indigenous languages, and I quote, must be sustained and strengthened even as the official languages are mastered, so that one can retain a strong sense of indigenous culture and self and acquire mastery of a language of international communication. In the opinion of the drafters of this plan, any other position would be to create a false and dysfunctional dichotomy. And the recommendation was accepted and endorsed by CARICOM heads of government in its conference, at its conference in Jamaica at the beginning of the last decade, so it's around 2000, 2001. But the roller coaster ride that has characterized St. Lucia's and the region's efforts to bring Creole into the mainstream of national policy making and policy decisions continue. So as far as I know, for St. Lucia, this is where we are at as far as language policy, the development of language policy. The recommendations have been made, but we seem unable to move from recommendation to plan and to action.